The world before them had never seemed so fragile. From the observation deck of Olympus Command, the Earth stretched out below like a sleeping giant, its cities still illuminated despite the growing shadow of its conquerors. The Kael'Zir ships hung in the sky like silent gods, their sleek organic hulls humming with energies beyond human comprehension. They had come not in fire and fury, but in condescension and restraint. They did not seek to exterminate. They sought to control, and yet to Elias Voss, their restraint was more terrifying than any weapon of war. He had watched it unfold over the past 3 years, the slow erosion of sovereignty, the forced integration of alien technology under the guise of assistance, the gradual subjugation of governments as the Kael'Zir placed advisors within human leadership, the dismantling of Earth's militaries, the selective sabotage of industries deemed too dangerous, the chilling broadcasts in perfect, neutral-toned English, "We are here to guide you. You are not ready for your own future." He had fought against. It resisted in the way humanity always did, by adapting, by pushing forward despite every obstacle. But even he had underestimated the inevitability of the moment when diplomacy would fail. The news arrived like a death sentence. The final ultimatum. The Kael'Zir had decided humanity would submit fully or they would be reduced to a controlled, pacified existence. No weapons, no independent research, no unrestricted movement. The same fate that had befallen 100 other species deemed unfit for ascension, and so the skies darkened and the power grids flickered. The orbital satellites fell silent. The world trembled as the first of their planetary control nodes activated, reshaping the very climate to their needs. It was happening, the great test of humanity, the moment history would remember. Elias clenched his fists against the cold metal railing. We have never been good at obeying orders. The control room behind him buzzed with frantic energy. The last remnants of Earth's true leaders, scientists, engineers, rogue military commanders, huddled around flickering displays, speaking in hushed, urgent voices. Their resistance had been a whisper in the dark, but now it had to become a roar, a technician's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. They're starting the second phase. Cities are losing power grid connections. The global net is fragmenting. A strategist shook his head. They don't need to fight us. They're dismantling civilization itself. Elias exhaled sharply, his breath fogging against the reinforced glass. The weight of inevitability pressed down on him, but he refused to buckle beneath it. No, not like this. He turned, his voice cutting through the chaos like steel. We're done waiting. We build. We take back everything they think they can strip from us. Silence, then a murmur of understanding, of fear, but also of something deeper. Hope. The war for humanity's future had begun. Darkness fell in pieces, not all at once. The first signs were subtle. Communications failing in high-density zones, entire city grids blinking out as alien interference pulsed through the infrastructure like an infection. Then came the panic, the realization that the Kael'Zir weren't just shutting down weapons, they were stripping humanity of its autonomy, one system at a time. The great cities of Earth, New Berlin, Tianjin, New York, and São Paulo, began to flicker and fade. Drones hovered in the streets, monitoring, herding, ensuring compliance. There was no mass slaughter, no orbital bombardments. It was colder than that. Elias Voss had seen war before, but never like this. This wasn't the raw brutality of battle. This was a controlled, precise culling of potential, a systematic pruning of an entire species, rendering them incapable of reaching beyond their designated boundaries. In the underground command center beneath Olympus Base, the Resistance's last stronghold, the war rooms were alive with desperate energy. Every monitor displayed maps of darkened continents, reports flooding in from their final communication lines. Paris just lost its last generator hub. grids collapsing. Their orbital suppressors are repositioning. They're not targeting. And people, they're wiping digital records, research databases. This isn't just control, it's erasure. A strategist swore under his breath. They're dismantling our future. Elias stood at the center of it all, jaw clenched. Then we take it back. A low hum reverberated through the chamber as the command table activated, revealing the last desperate plan of a dying resistance. The architects, a coalition of surviving scientists, rogue AIs and strategists, had prepared for this moment. If humanity couldn't fight on equal footing, they would change the battlefield itself. The room's air thickened with the weight of unspoken fears. "We have one shot," said Dr. Kael'Zir, a former engineer from the Titan Research Initiative. "The alien suppressor network is operating through their quantum nodes. We've been tracking anomalies, areas where their systems interact with our own tech. If we can hijack even one of those nodes, we can create a breach point." Elias narrowed his eyes. "A breach for what?" Kael'Zir inhaled slowly. "To steal their fire, to make it our own." For a moment the room was silent, absorbing the audacity of what was being proposed. Humanity wouldn't just resist, they would evolve. The plan was insanity. Infiltrate a Kael'Zir command relay, tap into their neural architecture and override it. The Kael'Zir didn't just operate with ships and soldiers, they manipulated entire ecosystems, bending planets to their will. If the resistance could seize even a fraction of that power, they wouldn't just survive, they would change the rules of the game. The final war wouldn't be fought with bullets or missiles, it would be fought with creation. A skimmer sped through the ruins of what had once been the North American energy grid, its pulse engines whispering against the cold night air. The infiltration team was small. Elias, Kael'Zir, a cyber warfare specialist named Reyes, and 2 ex-military operatives who had survived the first purges. Above them, Kael'Zir sentinels drifted in perfect formations, their translucent wings refracting light as they scanned the ground below. Unlike human drones, these weren't mere machines. They were constructs of living code, fragments of an intelligence far beyond simple AI. Elias checked his pulse rifle, an archaic weapon compared to what humanity had once wielded, but one of the few things the Kael'Zir hadn't been able to disable. Their suppressors worked on complex networks, but something as brutally simple as chemically propelled lead still did the trick. Reyes worked quickly, hacking into a ground relay that fed power to the nearest alien command node. The system fought back, sending out pulses of interference, but Reyes was faster. "I'm in," she muttered. "Bypassing their sensory grid, we have 90 seconds before they compensate." The entrance to the node was a seamless structure of alien architecture, a perfect monolith of shifting black metal. It pulsed with energy, a living thing rather than mere construction. As they stepped inside, the air changed. It was colder, heavier, like stepping into the lungs of some great beast. The walls pulsed with light, shifting patterns forming in response to their presence. A warning or an acknowledgement? Kael'Zir was already at the interface, hands trembling as he unrolled a series of neural conduits, modified from the very alien tech they sought to exploit. "If this works, we'll have a backdoor into their network." Elias kept his weapon raised, scanning the shadows. "And if it doesn't?" Kael'Zir exhaled sharply. "Then we die with the rest of them." There was no time for doubt. Reyes activated the uplink. The conduits flared to life, threads of light reaching into the walls, merging with the alien structure. Then the world shuddered. A voice that was not a voice spoke. "You are not authorized." The walls rippled, the monolith recognizing the intrusion. The Kael'Zir were aware. A blinding pulse erupted through the chamber. For a single excruciating moment, Elias felt his mind unravel, visions pouring into his skull, an alien consciousness pressing against his own. 1,000 worlds broken, 100 civilizations turned to dust, the weight of a species that had deemed itself the guardians of order, and beneath it all, fear, not of humanity's destruction, but of what humanity might become. The realization struck like lightning. They weren't conquering humanity. They were containing them. Elias tore himself free of the vision, gasping for breath. Around him, alarms blared as the system struggled against the incursion. Reyes was yelling something, warnings about security protocols activating. But all Elias could think about was the truth. They were afraid of what humans could build. Carter's voice cut through the chaos. "We have access, partial control of the network." No hesitation. Elias seized the moment, override their suppressors, give power back to the cities, make them see what we can do. The monolith screamed, the walls fractured, pulses of energy radiating, outward as the network buckled under its own weight. Across the world, systems flickered to life, power grids rebooting, communication lines reconnecting. Cities once plunged into silence roared with renewed defiance, and in the heavens, the Kael'Zir ships stirred. They had underestimated humanity for the last time. Elias Voss lifted his weapon, eyes burning with something far greater than defiance. Now we begin. The storm had broken. Across the world, cities that had been left to wither under the Kael'Zir's grip flickered back to life. The stolen energy surged through human infrastructure like a second sunrise, a defiant pulse of resistance that spread through the darkest corners of civilization. The resistance had done the impossible. They had cracked the first layer of the Kael'Zir's control. But victories are fragile things. Olympus' command was a flurry of movement, filled with the sounds of boots against steel, urgent voices over crackling comms, and the low hum of alien technology scavenged and repurposed. Elias Voss stood at the center of it all, watching as new data flooded in. Reyes worked furiously at her station, sweat slicking her forehead. "We've reactivated 43% of global power grids. The Kael'Zir suppressors are fighting back, but they weren't expecting an internal override. We've got a window." Kader's voice was lower, graver. "They'll retaliate. Hard." They had forced the Kael'Zir into a corner. That was both a victory and a warning. A deep tremor rolled through Olympus base. Then another. The retaliation had begun. In orbit, the Kael'Zir ships adjusted their stance. For years, they had played the role of careful shepherds, guiding humanity away from its self-destructive tendencies, restricting access to weapons of war, monitoring technological advancements. But humans had proven yet again that they were not sheep to be led. They were wolves who built their own forests. The Kael'Zir emissary Vekrashan stood aboard his observation deck, hands clasped behind his back as the first wave of shock forces deployed. Below, Earth's surface burned with fresh fires of defiance. Human-built war machines, once rusting relics of a forgotten era, were coming back online. Makeshift fortresses had risen in the ruins of cities, and humanity, fragile, reckless, impossible humanity, had adapted. It was what made them dangerous. Not their weapons, not their armies, their refusal to remain what they were. A hollow image of a fellow commander flickered into view, their luminous eyes dark with worry. "They have breached our network. We must proceed with full pacification." Vekrashan did not answer immediately. He had seen the destruction of worlds, had studied the consequences of unchecked advancement. His people had not been the first to impose control upon others. They had once been the controlled, and that was why they could not allow humanity to reach beyond its grasp. Deploy the Arbiter Protocol. This world will not be given a choice. Kael'Zir drop pods rained down in streaks of burning light, impacting the Earth with seismic force. Unlike their previous tactics of quiet suppression, these were something different, heavier, more brutal. They were done playing the role of reluctant wardens. Now they were enforcers. Elias Voss barely had time to react before the ground beneath. Olympus base trembled violently, a column of fire and dust erupting from the northern perimeter. Within moments, the alarm screamed. Breaches along the outer defenses, combat units engaging. He grabbed his rifle, heart hammering as he sprinted toward the command deck. Through the reinforced glass, he saw them. The Kael'Zir enforcers were, unlike their floating sentinels, these were biomechanical monstrosities, sleek black exoskeletons fused with pulsing veins of plasma. Their movements were fluid, too fluid, like living shadows wielding weapons that hummed with an energy beyond human understanding. The outer defenses lit up with counterfire. Railguns, scavenged energy turrets, even salvaged Kael'Zir tech now turned against its makers. The resistance had spent years preparing for a fight they weren't supposed to win, but now they weren't just fighting, they were building the future with every bullet fired. Rhea's voice crackled over comms. "They're hitting every major. Resistance stronghold. We're stretched too thin." Elias didn't hesitate. "Then we stop fighting their war. We make them fight ours." The war did not unfold in conventional battles. It was fought in hijacked infrastructure, in sabotaged supply lines, in technology bent and twisted into something new. Humanity had spent decades preparing for wars against itself. Nations against nations, ideologies clashing like storms. And yet, in its darkest hour, it had done something extraordinary. It had unified. Across the globe, factions that had once been at odds now worked together. Engineers and hackers turned power grids into weapons, rewriting Kael'Zir systems from within. Underground scientists worked frantically to reverse engineer alien energy sources, and in the heart of it all, Elias Voss led the charge. He fought on the front lines, not as a commander issuing orders from a safe distance, but as a soldier. Covered in dust and blood, rifle in hand, heart pounding with something greater than defiance. Elias wiped blood from his face, staring up at the sky where the alien fleet loomed. "That's the problem, isn't it?" he muttered under his breath. "Containment is not an option." He tapped into the Resistance's main comms, his voice cutting. "Through the noise of war. No more retreating, no more surviving. We don't just fight back, we build. We take their power, their knowledge, and we use it. We are done playing by their rules." Across the globe, humans answered his call. A city once darkened by suppression flared to life with new, scavenged technology. A colony that had been on the brink of collapse now stood fortified with walls of hybrid metal. A resistance that had been fractured and desperate was now something else, something terrifying. The war was no longer about survival. Humanity was about to prove why they were the one species in the galaxy that refused to break, because when others tried to tear them down, humans built up the world. Cities that should have been graveyards now pulsed with the glow of defiance. Fires raged across shattered battlefields, but not as symbols of destruction. They were beacons. Every ember, every flickering light was a declaration that humanity had refused to kneel. The war had changed. It was no longer a desperate fight for survival. It was a reclamation. The resistance had done what should have been impossible. They had hacked the very bones of the Kael'Zir's dominion, twisting their technology into something new. Energy that had once powered the oppressor's orbital control systems now pulsed through human-built fortresses, amplifying weapons, restoring lost infrastructure. And in the shadows, something more terrifying was taking shape. Humanity was evolving. Elias Voss stood in the command chamber of Olympus base, staring at the war map as it flickered with new data. Every stronghold the Kael'Zir had taken was being contested. Human-built walkers, scavenged alien tech grafted onto steel, lumbered through ruined streets. He had fought wars before, but never like this. This wasn't a resistance anymore. It was an ascension. Kada's voice cut through the tension. "They're shifting tactics." Elias turned, jaw tightening. "Explain." Reyes swore under her breath. They're pulling back from direct ground assaults. Instead of fighting us, they're accelerating their terraforming protocols. The room fell silent. Elias's heartbeat slowed, then steadied. Of course, if they couldn't break humanity, they'd break the planet instead. Vekrashan's voice echoed over the hijacked comms. You mistake survival for victory, Elias Voss. We have studied your kind. You are a species that thrives on conflict, on the illusion of choice. But war is not your salvation. It is your nature's flaw. Elias exhaled slowly. You still don't understand, do you? A pause. The faintest flicker of hesitation. Enlighten me, Vekrashan said. Elias smirked, though there was no humor in it. We are not just warriors. We are builders. The war map shifted, updating in real time. Cities that had once been lost now stood reinforced with a fusion of human and alien technology. Energy barriers repurposed from Kael'Zir, terraforming arrays now protected human settlements instead of wiping them out, and in orbit, something far worse was happening. Reyes grinned from her console. We hijacked their planetary uplink. Elias's smirk turned into something colder. Tell me we did more than that, she nodded. We rewrote it. A ripple of realization passed through the war room. They hadn't just stopped the Kael'Zir from transforming Earth. They had forced it to evolve on their terms. Vekrashan's voice was quieter now, calculating. What have you done? Elias raised his eyes to the heavens. We turned your own weapons into the foundation of a new world. You tried to make us weak. Instead, you made us unstoppable. Silence. Then, a shift in the alien fleet's formation. The Kael'Zir had spent years believing humanity was reckless, dangerous, in need of control. They had assumed containment was the only logical course of action. But now, faced with an enemy that refused to break, that had rewritten its own fate, they hesitated. They faltered. For the first time, they feared. The orbital battle was unlike anything seen before. Humanity's stolen Kael'Zir technology had allowed them to do something no other species had attempted. They weren't just using alien weapons. They were creating their own. High above Earth, Kael'Zir warships engaged with a new breed of human craft, hybrid constructs of steel and living energy, their hulls pulsing with hacked alien architecture. They moved unpredictably, no longer bound by the limitations of human engineering alone. Elias was no longer on the ground. He stood aboard the Indomitus, the first warship of its kind, built from the wreckage of fallen Kael'Zir vessels. Its systems were a patchwork of stolen power, controlled by human hands, but pulsing with alien might. A Kael'Zir dreadnought loomed before them, its weapons humming with the energy of a collapsing star. Elias didn't flinch. Fire. The Indomitus unleashed its payload, a weapon crafted from Kael'Zir gravity-warping technology, but altered, repurposed, made better. The dreadnought imploded in silence, dragged into itself by a gravity well of its own creation. The tide had turned. Vekrashan watched from his command deck, luminous eyes unreadable. His kind had always believed in order above all else. They had fought wars against species that had crumbled under the weight of their doctrine. But humanity had looked into the abyss of its own extinction and decided to build a ladder. Instead, this was no longer a battle of survival. It was the birth of something new, something the Kael'Zir could no longer control. The final transmission came through the moment the dreadnought fell, a simple message, spoken in Kael'Zir dialect, but with the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Cease fire, open diplomatic channels. Elias exhaled slowly, tension finally releasing from his body. Now you're ready to talk. There was no gloating, no arrogance, just the understanding that humanity had forced the universe to recognize what it had always been, a force that built itself back up from the ashes, no matter how many times it was torn down. The war was over, but humanity had not just won. It had transformed, and the galaxy would never be the same. Not with the roar of triumph, not with the desperate cries of a dying species, but with the cold, measured stillness of something newly rewritten. Above Earth, the Kael'Zir fleet drifted, their formations broken, their weapons cold. They had not been defeated in the traditional sense, not annihilated, not driven into exile. They had been rendered obsolete. Humanity had not just survived, it had surpassed. Elias Voss stood aboard the Indomitus, gazing out at a sky that no longer belonged to a conquered world. The planetary uplink was still active, its stolen energy pulsing through Earth's ley lines like a second nervous system. The Kael'Zir's attempts at terraforming had been rewritten, not to mold Earth into an alien world, but to make it something entirely new, a fusion of both, evolved. The resistance had transformed into something else. No longer rebels, no longer soldiers fighting against inevitable extinction. They were architects of a new future, wielding stolen divinity and shaping it into something their ancestors could never have imagined. Humanity had never been meant to be caged. Now it stood at the threshold of something far greater than simple freedom. Olympus Base was no longer a hidden resistance stronghold. It was now the center of Earth's reconstruction and its evolution. Engineers worked tirelessly, integrating repurposed Kael'Zir technology into human infrastructure. The sky was thick with transport ships, both alien and human, working together. In uneasy harmony, for the first time, the lines between conqueror and conquered had blurred. Kael'Zir stood at the heart of it all, overseeing a project that should never have been possible. A new planetary network, free from alien oversight, powered by what had once been the Kael'Zir's greatest weapon. "We did it," Reyes murmured, standing beside Elias as they watched the world rebuild itself. "We turned their chains into scaffolding." He nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. "This is just the beginning." Reyes turned, eyes narrowing. "You think they'll come back?" Elias exhaled. "No, they won't need to. The Kael'Zir had been defeated not by war, but by irrelevance. Their systems had been compromised, their hold on Earth severed. They could no longer contain humanity because humanity had outgrown the cage, but that meant something else. The universe was watching, and something older, something greater, had just noticed that humanity had taken its first true steps beyond the boundaries of its cradle. The signal was faint, buried beneath the remnants of the Kael'Zir's shattered communications network. It was not from Earth, not from the Kael'Zir. Something else had been listening. Reyes paled as she decoded the final message. "This isn't over, is it?" Elias shook his head, staring at the distant stars. "No, it's only the beginning. Humanity had done the impossible. They had built themselves into something new, and the universe had taken notice." Elias Voss stood atop the observation deck of Indomitus, watching as Earth pulsed with new life beneath him. The planet was no longer just a battleground, no longer just a world that had barely survived annihilation. It was a beacon, a symbol of what humanity had become. The Kael'Zir had vanished from the system, retreating into the unknown reaches of space. Their doctrine of containment had failed, and they had chosen withdrawal over further conflict. But Elias knew the truth. They weren't retreating in defeat. They were fleeing from what came next. The stolen Kael'Zir uplink still hummed beneath Olympus Base, its signal reaching far beyond Earth's atmosphere. But there was something new buried in the transmissions now, a response, an ancient frequency, older than the Kael'Zir, older than anything in recorded history. A warning. Reyes worked in silence, fingers ghosting over her console as she unraveled the signal's complexity. The more she decoded, the paler she became. Elias finally spoke. "What is it?" She turned to him, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a distress call. It's not an invasion signal." Her hands trembled. "It's an invitation." The weight of her words settled between them, heavy as the void. Humanity had spent years fighting to survive, breaking free from its chains. But now, the doors to the greater universe had been opened, not by war, not by conquest, by evolution. Elias Voss exhaled, his gaze shifting to the infinite blackness beyond. The galaxy had feared what humanity might become. Now, it would find out. He turned to Reyes, eyes burning with the fire of a species that had never known how to stop. "Then let's answer." Beyond the horizon, the first human-built starship, powered by Kael'Zir technology, ignited its engines, and for the first time in history, humanity was no longer waiting for the universe to come to them. They were going to it.